Right, good morning. Now, hello and welcome to SHA. Now, can you all see a screen? Either this one or the one at the back. Can you hear me at the back? Yes, wave your hands if you can hear me. We do have a microphone, but it's got some horrible feedback. If I become inaudible, start sort of waving or gesticulating at me, so I know I need to speak up a little bit more. Now, first of all, hello and welcome. My name's Alan O'Rourke. I'm a lecturer in the public health section in SHA, and over the coming year, I hope to meet quite a few of you in nice, favourable circumstances, such as being your tutor for research methods on Friday mornings, or getting you thinking about your dissertations, or possibly being your personal tutor. Those are nice ways to run into me. Another little job I do in SHA, I rejoice in the title of being the Officer for Unfair Means. I think that should probably mean the Officer for the Prevention of Unfair Means, or loosely, the Plagiarism Officer. That's a rather less nice way to run into me if I have to interview you because we think there are unfair means in some of your written work. Hopefully that won't involve many of you, and if we're lucky this year, it won't involve any of you. That's not such a good way to run into me. I think you've already met Dan. Okay. The more astute of you will note that we have a section with you before lunch and a session with you after lunch. In the afternoon, we are going to teach you about a piece of software called Turnitin. How many of you have heard of Turnitin? How many of you have used Turnitin? Okay, irrespective of whether you have used it or not, please come to that presentation because we in SHA have a rather liberal way of using Turnitin. Even if you have used it elsewhere, I think we can teach you something new about how to use it constructively in your essays. Do come to that session. You must be able to use Turnitin to hand in your written work. SHA has now gone over to the electronic submission of all coursework up to and including your dissertations in about a year from now. If you can't use Turnitin, you won't be able to hand in work and you won't get any marks. So please come to the afternoon session. You must know how to use Turnitin. This morning's session, I want to talk to you about this thing called unfair means. And the idea is that by the end of these two sessions, you will understand what unfair means in written work are. You will know how to make sure you don't run into problems with those rules and regulations. If you do, you will know how we investigate and handle them, and you will be able to use Turnitin to hand in work and also to help you stop falling into trouble with unfair means. So there's quite a bit to cover. For those of you who are compulsive note takers, we are recording this session, partly for the benefit of students who may join later on the semester, partly for your colleagues who are studying with us online, and partly for any of you who want to catch up on bits you missed. And Dan, I think we will have a recording up on Mole within a week or so if you want to go back. Sometime this week anyway, if you want to go back and look at things. Okay, now, this is important. I've been at the university now for 19 years, and about the only thing I have students see get into trouble is for unfair means in written work. And by trouble, I mean potentially, although rarely, very serious trouble. It doesn't happen very often, but maybe every 2 or 3 years, I will have to refer a student for very serious plagiarism to a discipline committee at the university, and that discipline committee can, and sometimes does, throw you out. Lock, stock and barrel. No qualification, no award, no credit for the modules you've already passed. That doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So it is important that you understand the rules and regulations. There are not a load of traps for you to fall in. We are not out to catch you. The rules and regulations are quite straightforward, but you do need to be aware of them. Now, that's more or less what we want to cover today. We want to make sure you know what unfair means are. You know how to avoid running into trouble with them. We'll give you some hints and tips as to how to avoid running into trouble. We will also explain to you how we investigate them. So if any of you do run into problems, how we will interview and what will happen. And in the afternoon, we will talk to you a little bit about Turnitin and how to use that. Okay, what are these unfair means I keep mentioning? The university is quite explicit about this. Basically, it is cheating. It is an attempt by a student to gain an unfair advantage over other students in the completion of your written work and your exercises, or, a thing called collusion, helping someone else gain marks, working together. Cheating undermines the standards of the university awards and disadvantages those students who have attempted to complete assessments honestly and fairly. Most students do it honestly. Most students do the work. Most students deserve their awards. One or two don't. It is an offence. When we talk about unfair means, we do describe them as offences. It is an offence against the values of the academic community of which students and staff are both part. We use the term unfair means as a blanket term to cover four distinct but quite related problems. Plagiarism is probably the one you're most familiar with. Basically, that's copying from sources without properly acknowledging those sources. Self-plagiarism is a bit more subtle. We'll talk about that a bit later on. Self-plagiarism is plagiarising yourself. That's a bit more subtle, so we'll explain that to you. Collusion is where you're working too closely with another student or you are copying work from another student. It's not your own work. You've either acquired it from another student or you're working too closely on a piece of work which is set as an individual assignment. Exam misconduct is breach of the examination rules. Okay, plagiarism. You're probably most familiar with this. It does get into the news occasionally, as we shall see. This is basically where you present a piece of written work containing material. Most of that material in your case will be text, words, and you're presenting it in such a way that you want the marker to believe, or you appear to want the marker to believe, this is something you have written. And it's not. It's something you have copied from another source, a book, a journal, a website. You're kind of passing off someone else's material as your own without properly acknowledging it by citation and reference. And because of the sort of coursework we set you, most of that will be textual material. But plagiarism can apply to anything that someone else has created and which you then basically nick from them. So it could apply to music or pictures or graphs or a computer program. So basically you're using stuff from someone else, you're not acknowledging it properly. Famous people can plagiarise. Recently, Mrs. Donald Trump made a speech, and a number of people noticed that it was almost exactly word for word the same as a speech from Mrs. Michelle Obama. Now, apart from an obvious gradient of intelligence between these two women, the fact that Mrs. Obama made her speech in 2008 and Mrs. Trump made hers a few months ago does suggest an obvious source and plagiariser. Don't do this sort of thing. Now, how to avoid it? Nowadays, most books, many journals, lots of material on the website, it is very easy to construct an essay by copying and pasting bits of text. Electronic book, electronic journal, website, copy, paste, thunk, into a draft essay you are working on. Be careful about doing that. Generally, it is much, much safer for you to do it the old-fashioned way when everything was on paper. You have the source in front of you. It may now be on a computer screen rather than on your desk on a book, but you are making your own notes in your own words as you go along. Quite often when we interview students after plagiarism, we discover that the student who was doing that, they were copying and pasting lumps of text out of electronic books and journals into a draft version of their essay. With the best will in the world, they intended to rewrite those sections in their own words later on. But something happened, they ran up against a deadline, they forgot, they ran out of time, and they hand in a draft version of their essay, or an incomplete version of their essay, which contains chunks of text which have come from electronic sources. And that will get you into trouble. So really, it's a case of doing it the old-fashioned way, making notes in your own words as you go along. If you come across a phrase where you want to preserve the original wording, say a direct quote, a working definition of some concept, a phrase where you think the wording is so good you want to preserve a little bit of it, make it very clear in your notes this is a quote. You haven't paraphrased that section, but it is a quote and you're keeping it as a quote. Okay? Make sure you have notes of all your sources as you're going along lifting material from the books, journals, websites. Make sure there's all little notes, you know where it's come from, so you can cite and reference it properly, and you can check that later on. And that comes to the basic of accurate citation and referencing. I think you've had some sessions this week about academic writing, the need to make sure that you cite and reference things properly and consistently. And as we'll show you this afternoon, we not only allow, we encourage you to check a draft of your work through Turnitin before you hand it in, and the Turnitin report may highlight certain sections of your work which need some attention. Okay, that's plagiarism. That's fairly straightforward. Now, self-plagiarism is a bit more subtle. It's when we say, aha, you've handed this work in before already, and the university does not like you doing that. Your view may be, I've written this piece of text, I've researched it, it's cited, it's referenced, I've written it myself, I can now do what I like with it. No, sadly not quite like that. The university is not minded to give you 2 sets of marks for submitting the same piece of work for different modules. We'll have a little worked example, we'll show that later on, but basically if you find yourself in that situation, you go back to your sources and you write new text for the second essay. You don't copy and paste material from an early essay, which you've already had the marks, into a later essay. It's a little bit subtle, but we'll have a worked example later on. Collusion. This is when we have students working a bit too closely together. Now, sitting around you in this room is a wonderful source for you all while you're with us, your fellow students. You've come from all over the world, you've got all sorts of different qualifications, you've done all sorts of different jobs. The last thing we want to do is to stop you talking to each other and learning from each other. Some of you may take modules where we set you group work. We put you into little groups of 3 or 4 students, or we ask you to select a few friends and form a little group of 3 or 4. And as a group, we ask you to do something together, maybe to write a report or to give a presentation to your classmates. And if it's set as group work, and it should be very explicit that it is group work, we expect you all to contribute and all to get a fair share of the marks. But most of the essays you come across will be set as individual pieces of work. I think you'll know if you've been given group work. If it's individual work, we expect what you to hand in to be your own efforts. So chatting to your fellows about planning it, now you're going to attack it all right. But when you apply pen to paper, or more likely nowadays digit to keyboard, from then on what you're writing is your own work. And I'll have a few examples of that. There are 2 main forms of collusion. One is where one student actually borrows another student's work. So one student's done the work, another student borrows it, possibly without the first student's knowledge. We've had that happen in the past. An important point is that you are responsible for the security of your own work while you're writing it. When you pop down to the Shire Library, I hope you will find that computers in the Shire Library are set up so you cannot save work to the hard drive. You must save the work to a memory stick and take it away with you. Because we became aware some years ago that some students were saving, say, a literature search they were doing on the hard drive of the library computers, and another student was coming along and nicking it without their knowledge. If you are using things like laptops in open access areas like the Information Commons, be very careful if you're popping out and leaving your laptop behind. Well, first of all, it might not be there when you get back at all. So that's probably one point. But unless you have password protected your files, someone may come along and make a little copy without you knowing. So you are responsible for the security of your own work. That's one form of collusion, where a student is acquiring work which another student has legitimately done, possibly without the first student's knowledge. The other form of collusion is when people get together and write things jointly. And it's not supposed to be joint work, it's supposed to be individual work. The final thing which sometimes I get asked to look at is exam misconduct. Some of you may be doing modules where you have an unseen exam. Most of the modules have written work, but some of them have exams as well. And when it comes to problems in exams, this doesn't mean frank cheating. It's not like you've discovered some way of developing incredibly small handwriting and written all the answers on your shirt cuff, or you have a microfiche dot inside your glasses with all the answers on them. It doesn't have to be that sort of James Bond stuff. It's really just breaking the examination rules. And the rules are quite explicit. When the exam finishes, you must leave the exam hall in silence. I sometimes get reports saying students were talking at the end of the exam. And however exciting, unexpected, dramatic, terrible the exam has been, please remain in silence until you're outside the examination hall. And you can have a post-mortem to your heart's content, but remain silent until you've left the examination hall. The other thing is that as soon as the invigilator at the exam has told you that time is up, you must put down all pens, pencils, paintbrushes, chisels, and any other writing implements you are using. Don't try and write anything on your exam book after the invigilator has told you the exam's over. If you realise you have forgotten to fill in the front cover, please put your hand up and get the invigilator's permission before you attempt to write anything in. If you need to fill in your name or the date of the exam or things like that, please get the invigilator's permission. Do not attempt to write on the exam book after time has been called. The third thing are calculators. Some of you may be doing subjects like statistics or epidemiology, and you have an exam where you're required to do some mathematics. And a pocket calculator can be very handy. This is fine, but you must get your calculator approved by the university. So you take your calculator up to KICS, the big cabin just opposite the information commons up there. You go into KICS, they have a look at your calculator. If they're happy that it meets the university regulations, they give you a great big bright yellow sticker, thunk, on your calculator. And when you have got a calculator with a big yellow sticker on it that says this is approved, you may take it into the examination and use it. It's your responsibility to do this. Don't leave it to the last minute. If you've got an exam coming up which is going to need a calculator, go and get your calculator approved. If you take a calculator into the exam which has not got the big bright yellow sticker on, three things will happen. First of all, the invigilator will confiscate your calculator. You will get it back later. Secondly, they will give you a calculator from a bank of calculators which the university keeps, which are basic but adequate, and then you can proceed with the exam. And thirdly, they'll send me a little note and I will ask you to come and see me. If you have taken a calculator into an exam which has not been approved, we don't need to prove that the calculator has given you some sort of magical advantage, that somehow it enables you to get all the answers straight away without doing any work. We don't have to prove that. All we have to show is that you have broken the university rules by taking an unapproved calculator into the exam. At that stage, we can apply a penalty. And typically, for the parts of your exam for which the calculator would have been useful, we give you no marks because you've broken the rules. And if the exam consists almost entirely of mathematical calculations, that probably means you fail the exam and you have to resit it, and your mark in the resit is capped at 50%. This has happened a couple of times. We've had students sent up because they've taken unapproved calculators into exams. It's very, very simple. Get your calculator up to KICS, get a nice big yellow stamp on it, no problems after that whatsoever. Now, time maybe for a bit of work, Dan, I think. Let's see what you think about unfair means. If you submit work which contains some of these forms of unfair means, who does this affect? Is it only a personal issue for you, or does it affect anyone else? Well, you've got your clickers. Dan, I think, Dan, do you want to...
button on the clicker to correspond with the answer. So 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 for not sure. And we should have about 35 responses.
Okay, right, well, they're piling in. 35 odd, 35, 40, we're nearly there.
32,
Okay.
33, that's close.
Okay, fine. Well done, you got the right answer. It affects lots of people. Now, who, yes, well done. 91% of you got what I would consider the right answer here. Now, who does it affect? If you use unfair means, who else do you have an impact on? Do they need instructions? Is it fairly straightforward? Yeah.
Click the button.
Okay. Is it entirely personal, or is it part of a much wider problem? I think we're nearly there, shall we? Scores on the doors? Brilliant. Okay, yes. It's unfair to your fellow students because most of you are doing things by the book. You're doing the work to get the award, the qualification. And if you are cutting corners and cheating, you're not being fair to your fellow students. I know from previous experience that many of your families have made quite a big sacrifice to send you to Sheffield to study, and they're not going to be too happy if you go home with a letter saying you've been thrown out for plagiarism. When you leave the university, you have a qualification, and many of you will want to take that qualification to a future employer. By giving you that qualification, we are saying you have developed certain skills and knowledge. But if you haven't done the work, you haven't developed that skill, that knowledge. So your employer will soon see through you and realise that you don't have that expertise. Your qualification is not true for you. The university has a right to uphold academic, or duty to uphold the quality of the degrees we award. And certainly we as academic staff have an interest in marking fairly and not giving you marks if you haven't done the work for them. Now, let's keep you on the ball here. Two little examples, three little scenarios. You're writing an assignment. You find a journal, maybe online. You copy a paragraph into your essay. You forget to, or you don't put quotation marks around it. As we'll show you this afternoon, Turnitin should pick that up. Have you done anything wrong? Is this a problem? Click, 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 click. Click, 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 click. Nearly there. 30-ish. Okay. No, not sure. It's not come up, Dan, or have I?
Oh, it's just come up right over the picture.
Ah.
So 97%.
Ah, right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Yes, that is a problem. That is a fairly gross example of plagiarism. Lump of text into your essay, still in the original words, not indicated as a quote, not cited and referenced properly. That is kind of first line plagiarism. Okay, I'll keep a better eye on the screen next time. Okay, you've got through semester 1 okay. In semester 2, you're writing a report, say you're doing a module in emergency medicine. And you remember that in the first semester, you also did an essay on healthcare in the developing world. You realise there's some sort of overlap, so you recycle some text. You're very green, shall we say. You copy some text out of your emergency medicine essay, and you put it straight into your global health essay. Is that wrong? Is that acceptable, or is that going to cause problems? Okay. Yes, this is what we call self-plagiarism. You are recycling material from an essay. You've handed it in, you've got your marks, you want to get 2 sets of marks for the same piece of text. And the university does not like that. I suspect that if you find yourself in this situation, the 2 modules will actually ask you to write about rather different things anyway. So it's probably not going to be a terribly good idea. If you find yourself in this situation, think, oh yeah, I remember reading about this last term. Yeah, I had to look this up. Go back to the sources you used for your first essay and write new text. But don't just copy and paste chunks of text from a previous essay into a new essay. Now, just to sort out 1 or 2 confusions which do crop up at this stage, sometimes on some courses we set you formative coursework. We ask you to do exercises as you go along. You have to do them to pass the module, but they don't generate a mark. The work is not marked formally. And you can use formative work as the basis for some summative work later on. It's not self-plagiarism because you're not submitting the same piece of work twice to get 2 sets of marks. The first time it's formative, it's not marked. The second time it's summative and it's marked. But after you've got your marks for it, you can't get more marks for it somewhere else. So I'll give you an example, that's the easiest thing. How many of you are doing research methods on Friday morning? Okay. As part of that module, research methods, you will have a series of journal entries. There will be 6 journals for you to fill in as you work through the module, basically building up a research proposal. That's formative work, so you get feedback from your tutor to see how you're getting on with the ideas for a research proposal. At the end of the module, the coursework, the thing that gets you the marks, is to write a full research proposal. That's the thing that gets you the marks. And you can use your journal entries as the basis for that. Because your journal entries are formative work. If you want to use the ideas, if you've done good journal entries and they make a good research project, you can use that as the basis of writing your research proposal, which is the coursework. If you've done a really good research proposal, you might then want to use that as the basis for your dissertation next year. And if you want to use your research proposal, you have to write a dissertation proposal. That's another piece of formative work. So if you want to use your research proposal to write your dissertation proposal, which is, again, not an assessed piece of work, it's a formative piece of work, your dissertation supervisor will basically look at it and say, yes, this is a good project, let's go. That's okay as well. So formative work feeds into summative work, okay, but if it's marked coursework, do not recycle material from one essay for which you've had your marks into another essay for which you hope to get some more marks later on. Now, a slightly more complex one. We're on to sort of the collusionist now. Have we got anyone in who's taking HEADS modules? Yes, one tentative hand going up, right? Anyone else taking modules in HEADS? Health Economics Decision Making. Is that what it sounds like? I can never remember these days. Yeah. Okay, this is an example which has come up on HEADS, but it illustrates the point quite well. There are some of the heads modules where what the tutors do is they ask the students to assess a new treatment for an illness. There is some sort of illness, and there is an existing drug treatment which maybe has been around for years, and there is a new drug which has come along. And what heads want you to decide is whether the new drug is worth using or not. And typically what they ask the students to do is to develop a mathematical model, quite complex ones from what I've seen, in a spreadsheet. A mathematical model which enables you to compare the old treatment and the new treatment, and maybe to do something like a cost-benefit analysis. How much does the new treatment cost, and how much clinical benefit does it buy? And on the basis of that sort of mathematical model in a spreadsheet, then to write a little report. So imagine you're a heads module, you give this task, it's set as an individual task, you have to develop a mathematical model to test the new treatment, and on the basis of your mathematical model you write a report. Again, are we going to...
this is no clickers.
No, just hands up or something. Right, okay. Who thinks having an informal chat with fellow students about planning the analysis is okay? Okay, I'd agree with that. Yes, it's informal. Living that in the corridor, nothing disastrously wrong here. Okay, you and a fellow student decide a little bit of discussion about which databases you might use to find information. Okay, not okay? Well, okay, hands up for okay. Yeah, I mean, that's just a bit of general advice, and you've still got to go and look at the database and do the work yourself. You've still got to find the papers and read them. You ask another student how long it took them to write the report. Okay? Yeah, okay. That's probably just help. How long is it going to take them? Do I need to panic yet, or do I need to start work immediately? You know, it took me 4 weeks. Oh my God, I'm out of time. Help. Okay. You set up a study group to work on the spreadsheet model. Who thinks this is okay? Right, I'm afraid it's not. Because remember I said the work is set as an individual piece of work. And what we found in the past, this is the exact example I've had from heads, is the students get together, a little 3 or 4 of them, and they start building the model jointly and passing drafts around between them and working on it as a joint piece of work. It's set as an individual piece of work. So this is not okay, I'm afraid. The problem then is that when the students hand in their work, what the markers sometimes note is that there are 3 or 4 students, and in all of them the model contains some common error or some unusual way of doing things or some atypical way of calculating. We're saying odd, and 3 or 4 students have got the same oddity amongst them. And that suggests that they have been working together. They've built the model jointly, and it's supposed to be an individual piece of work. So that will get you into trouble. At that stage we'd say, well, this is one form of collusion where the students are working together on a piece of work which should be an individual piece of work, so we would penalise all the students. All the students would lose marks. Okay? Right, what about the next one? You ask another student to let you see a draft of their report. You go to a mate and say, can I see what you're up to? Who thinks that's okay? You got scared now, okay. bit borderline this. I'd say that's getting a little bit dangerous. You might just look at it and give it back to them, but what if you start copying some of their ideas? Not a good idea on the whole. What about the last one? We'll turn the other way around. You're the good student. You've done your work. You've written it up. It's almost ready to hand in. The day before hand in, one of the weaker brethren comes to you saying, I'm in trouble. Can I please just have a look at your version? Send it to me electronically. Can I please just have a look at what you've been up to so I can get some ideas of how to get it in on time? Is that okay? Nope. No, definitely not. How do you know they're not going to borrow your ideas? And I'm afraid you must, under these circumstances, be like Pharaoh. You must harden your heart and say no. Go and do the work yourself. And we have had this problem in the past where this is the other form of collusion, where one student has honestly done the work and a friend of theirs or a colleague has either managed to extract it from them or possibly has stolen it from them. As explained previously, if you leave your work lying around an open access machine, someone may get hold of your work without you knowing. Okay? So you've done the work and someone else has nicked your ideas. Again, we'd need to see both of you to find out what's happened. Usually it's pretty obvious which direction knowledge is flowing. In the case of the one who did the work, well, we give you a bit of a warning about making sure your work is more secure in the future. The person who copied, well, obviously we penalise them by ignoring the work which they have copied from another student. With unfair means, you sometimes use this idea of detection, intention, practice. Detection is how good we are finding out unfair means. I think on the whole we're pretty good. Okay, we might miss a few, but I think we're pretty good at spotting them. Intention. one of the questions we will ask if we have to see you for unfair means is this a deliberate attempt to deceive the university? Is this a deliberate attempt to get marks without deserving them? Or is it accidental because you don't understand the rules? Even after you've been to one of my brilliant presentations and done all the other stuff, you still don't quite understand some of the rules. And I have to admit that we are very liberal in this sense. We'll tend to err on the side of caution and say, okay, you didn't quite understand it, it's a bit technical, it's a bit complex. For your first offence, we will give you a warning, but we won't do anything terrible to you. So we will err on the side of caution generally and say, it's probably accidental. Assuming it's your first offence, we can't do it for your second offence, because after you've had a second warning, you can't pretend you don't understand the rules. And one or two other cases I'll come to in a minute where we take a serious line, but generally we will err on the side of being nice to you. Practice, well, often when we see students for unfair means, we realise that the students have problems with their academic writing style. They don't understand citation and referencing properly. We try and make these things an educational process. We will divert you, or we'll direct you to suitable sources of help and advice after seeing you. How to avoid these problems? Well, quick refresher. I'm sure you've had some of this elsewhere this week. Don't cut and paste, even out of electronic journals where it's so easy. Make notes the old-fashioned way in your own words. Familiarise yourself with good citation and referencing. Learn one of the citation and referencing systems, either Harvard or Vancouver. Learn one of them. Learn how to use it systematically and consistently through your essay, and use it accurately. Particularly for those of you for English is not your first language, you may want to make use of the Writing Advisory Service or Deborah Cobbett's classes, which will be running in Shah, starting in the next week or so, about use of English language. There are Irish sessions online. There is lots of advice in the student handbook. So there's lots of sources of help out there so you don't run into trouble. Now, a little example. In the UK at the moment, a very big topic is health inequalities. And you have come to a city, Sheffield, which has quite a problem with health inequalities. Got any native Sheffielders in? Hey, anyone else from Sheffield? Few. Anyone from Barnsley? Rotherham? Doncaster? Far-flung places like that? Okay, well, those who are native may realise that Sheffield is a city which is divided, more or less in a diagonal line running from the southwest to the northeast. In the southwest of the city are the nice leafy suburbs, where I suspect most of the university staff live. On the northeast side of the city, if you ever go up there, most of you, the only reason you'll want to go up there is if something nasty happens and you have to go to the Northern General Accident and Emergency Department, because that's the only hospital that has an A&E department at the moment. The Northern General is off on the north side of the city. The northeast side of the city you'll find consists of large housing estates. It looks a bit grim. Life is tough out there. People have poorer health than they do on the southwest side of the city. So there's a big issue about health inequalities. I'm sure you'll run into this in some of your modules, particularly if you're doing the MPH programme. We want to do something about these health inequalities. So we set you an essay about health inequalities, and we find this phrase in your essay. While within England there are nowhere near the extremes of inequalities in mortality and morbidity seen globally, inequality is still substantial and requires urgent action. In England, people living in the poorest neighbourhoods will on average die 7 years earlier than people living in the richest. And again, in Sheffield, people in the southwest of the city tend to live longer than people on the northeast. If anything, it might be worse than that. I understand there are some parts of Glasgow up in Scotland where male life expectancy is round about 66 years. And there are some parts of Chelsea, the richest borough in London, where male life expectancy is over 80 years. Now, does that look all right? This piece of text? Ooh. Why? What have you spotted?
How does this person know that people die 7 years earlier? They didn't do the research.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Numerical data, anything with numbers in it, you must provide a citation. So you must tell me where do you get that 7 years figure from. So I'd expect a reference and a citation to go with that. Good point. Anything which has numbers in it. Basically, if you feel a citation is necessary, put one in and make sure that your citation leads to a reference at the end of your work. You'll never get marked down for having too many citations, but you may well get marked down for not having enough. So factual material must always be cited and referenced, and certainly anything with numbers in it, or percentages, or rates. Yes, that's a good point. Okay, any other objections? Needs a citation, needs a reference for that 7 year figure. Does it look okay? Well, there's a slight problem. It comes straight out of this document. Fair society, healthy lives. usually referred to loosely as the Marmot Report, after a chap called Michael Marmot, who wrote it about 8 years ago now. This really put health inequalities on the scene in Britain, big style. And then along came people like Pickett and Wilkinson with the Spirit Level and a whole load of literature like that. But this is kind of the document that started the ball rolling, if you like. And embedded in it is exactly that piece of text. And this is one reason for checking your work through Turnitin, as we'll show this afternoon. I suspect this would show up in Turnitin as a text match, as coming from the Marmot Report. So that potentially is a problem, because those are words that have come straight out of the Marmot Report, but you're presenting them to your marker as if it's something you've written. So, problem. That would count as plagiarism. Now, what about if you try this? How does this look? Acceptable? Not acceptable? Undecided? I think this would still get you into trouble, because all you've done is you've replaced single individual words. So you replace, for instance, mortality with death, people with folks. This is the sort of thing which, if you sat down with the original text and you had in front of you a dictionary or a book called the Thesaurus, which gives you different words which mean the same thing, and you just go through replacing odd words here and there with words which are spelt differently but you think mean the same thing. And I think this is still really plagiarism, because you're not rewriting your own words, you're just changing the odd word here and there, and it usually sticks out because you use very odd phrases. Stop living is not really an English way of saying dying. It's a very awkward way of saying dying. He died. He stopped living. It sounds a bit funny. So if you try this, often you find the wording looks very strange and people pick it up. So I would say that is not acceptable, I'm afraid. It's not properly rewritten in your own words. You just change the odd word here and there. How about this one?
Technically? I mean, it's correctly cited,
Yes.
but it's still not your own thoughts, whereas you just copy paste.
Okay.
We use a quote.
Quote, is it plagiarism?
No.
No. Is it going to get you many marks?
No.
No. Okay, it is a direct quote. You very clearly indicated you've got your quotation marks at the beginning and the end. You said these are not my words. These have come from this document, and you have cited and referenced it fully. That's a nice example of a direct quote, properly laid out, referenced and cited. But if all your essays consists of quote after quote after quote, stitched together with a few words, Professor Black says, Professor Plum says, Miss Scarlett says, Colonel Mustard says, we won't see you for plagiarism, but it's very unlikely you will get many marks, because you have not shown that you understand the concepts you are dealing with. At master's level, we expect you to be able to use your sources, your books, your journals, your websites, in a critical and analytical way, to show that you understand the concepts and you can manipulate those ideas and you can discuss them in your own words, which shows to your marker that you understand what's going on. So we're not going to see you for plagiarism for this, but it's not going to get you very many marks. Now, some of you may come from countries where the food is very highly spiced and exciting. When you go out for a meal in England, you will be bitterly disappointed. Food in England is bland and warm. And I suggest your approach to quotations is a bit like the English approach to adding spices to food. Use very sparingly. And I would suggest that most of the sort of essays you're going to be writing for us in SHAR, not more than 10% of your essays should be direct quotes at the upper limit. To go with this tutorial, let's go with this session, there is a tutorial pack, which will also be available on Mole, called a Guide to Academic Writing, and there's a section in there specifically about quotes, where they're appropriate and where you might want to use them, but I suspect you should use quotes very, very sparingly. There are a few examples. If you're quoting, say, statute, law, or an act of parliament, you can't change the words without changing the meaning. So you might have large quotes from, say, an act of parliament, but you're studying in the medical faculty, not the law faculty, so I don't think you're going to need to do that. So quotes, okay, but used sparingly. How about this one? Looking better now? There is paraphrasing in there. There is a reference. You have kept this small and rather dramatic quote. You know, it's rather dramatic to say that people in poor areas will die 7 years before than if they lived in a much richer area. So that's rather a sort of dramatic quote. You might want to keep that. And again, you've got that cited. And for quotes, you should usually provide in addition, in your citation, a page number or a paragraph number so we know exactly where it's come from. So that's a more successful way of approaching it, how to use that document. Paraphrase with a quote. The quote is clearly indicated as a quote. It's nicely cited and referenced. Now, I'll just pause just briefly before I look at what we do if we think you have committed unfair means. Has anyone got any questions at this stage about unfair means? Yes, hello.
What referencing system should we use?
You can either use Vancouver or Harvard. We're happy with either of them. The main thing is that you use one accurately and consistently throughout each essay. Learn to use one and use it consistently. They're both good. Okay. Right, let's... Yes, hello.
I have two questions. The first one, do you have any recommendations how many references should be in a essay, for example, for 2,000 words?
As many as is necessary.
Is there any minimum number or?
Not really. No. I mean, generally, the more background reading you do, the better. And usually, a large and appropriate references, not just references for the sake of references, but the fact that you have read widely around your subject. And that you have used different sources. Because as soon as you start researching even a simple problem, you'll find there are different opinions. You know, let's get 5 doctors together and say what's the best antibiotic to treat pneumonia. We'll have 6 answers to start with, probably. And as soon as you research even quite a simple question, you'll probably find there are various opinions backed up by research of differing qualities. So yes, a good reference list will show that you've read round and you've examined it from different aspects and you've tried to bring together different views and different conclusions. But the actual numbers is really up to you.
Okay.
Yep.
And the second one, for example, if I'm giving example of Russia and using some numbers, can I use the report that was written in Russian from Ministry of Health?
Yes.
Or it should be only in English?
No, if you've got some data from Russia which is relevant, that's fine, but you must tell us where it's come from.
Yes, of course.
As long as you can cite and reference that Russian health report.
But language is not a problem.
You obviously speak more languages than English.
Yes.
Yes, okay. If you can speak other languages, you can use documents in other languages. Yes, as long as you cite and reference them. Okay. How do we tackle plagiarism? Ideally, we want to stop it happening. It's not as if we're sitting around waiting for you to commit to plagiarism so we can have a bit of fun at your expense. We'd rather spend our time on far more constructive things. And the idea is that through sessions like this, a little task for you called the test essay, which I'm going to tell you about, teaching, all the student handbooks, we want you to avoid it. So the idea is you do not fall into the trap, you don't fall into the problem with unfair means, everything goes smoothly for you. We are, however, on the lookout for it. You use Turnitin, we use Turnitin. And I'll show you how we use Turnitin and how we expect you to use Turnitin for checking your essays. Sometimes phrases just look odd and we go Googling them. And sometimes it's amazing what you can turn up. Sometimes when you're reading an essay, you realise that it is a very strange mix of styles. It starts with the active voice, then it moves into the passive voice. There's a bit in the present tense, there's a bit in the past tense. Suddenly the standard of English gets much, much better, suggesting it's been copied from somewhere else. It starts as if it is a literature review, and then it starts to turn into a report about a piece of primary research. There's just, you can see where the bits have been stuck together. Most students have now discovered that Word has a Control-A font size button, but in the past some students would hand in essays where you could actually see the cut and paste, literally. And I remember marking one once where I realised the bits that were in black times Roman were the student's own work, but not very good, and the bits that were in Arial Brown had been nicked from somewhere else and were much better. But most people have discovered how to at least make the font size consistent. But we will keep an eye out for things. If we decide that there is evidence of unfair means, then we have to interview you, we may have to apply penalties, we have to advise you. In extreme cases, we may send you off for a formal disciplinary hearing. That is all very time consuming. We would prefer not to do that, but in certain cases we do have to. Now, here are some excuses. This is, you can't get me of plagiarism, I've got this from the University of Essex. Excuses. I didn't think you needed to reference material on the web. Yes, you do. You were talking about referencing and citation. You use websites, fine, but you must cite and reference websites, just like you'd cite and reference a journal. And the student handbook explains how to do that. I made lots of notes, but couldn't remember where I found the information. Good note-taking, and for every little note, make sure you have some indication of where it came from, so you can go back and find it and check it, and you know how to cite and reference it if it gets into your essay in the end. I thought it would be okay as long as I included the source in my bibliography. A bibliography at the end of an essay is just a list of all the books and papers you've looked at while you're writing the essay. That's not what we're interested in. What we want is a reference list, and in your essay there are citations at the end of little blocks of text, or those factual numerical details. There are citations telling us where that information has come from, and each of those citations has a reference at the end in a reference list. That's what matters. A bibliography, just these are things I looked at while I was thinking about my essay. I'm not too bothered about that. We want a reference list, and everything that you've cited is in your reference list. I left it too late and didn't have time to reference my sources. Time management is a skill you have to learn, I'm afraid. Plan ahead, and plan to have enough time to do a Turnitin check on your work before you hand it in. Now, this has a big red line around it. I thought it would be okay to use material I had purchased online. This is quite a different kettle of fish. I said that generally, when we see you for unfair means, we are liberal in the sense of saying we think it could be accidental, we're not going to be very hard on you. But you can't accidentally pay someone to write your essays. That's not accidental, that's deliberate. If we have any suspicions that you have paid someone to write or edit your essay for you, an individual or one of these companies who offer to write your essays for you, we would interview you, but the university would be much stricter at that stage. If I thought you had commissioned or paid someone to write your essay for you, you'd be straight off to a disciplinary hearing with a recommendation to get you chucked out. We are aware that there are certain companies prowling around who target students, particularly students who, dare I say it, look non-UK or non-European. And they will come along with wonderful promises. We'll write you an essay. Guaranteed 2-1, plagiarism free. Don't believe it. It's not worth the risk. Now, I know that one or two of you, particularly some of you who English is not your first language, you may possibly want someone to proofread your essay for you. That's kind of acceptable, but we have quite strict guidelines on what is and is not acceptable in terms of proofreading. I'm asking Matt Stevenson down in TSU to put a little note up on the student hubs with some guidelines on what is and what is not acceptable. So proofreading, as long as it is within very narrow restrictions, is okay. Paying someone to write your essay for you is most definitely not, and will get you into trouble. There was a wonderful letter in The Guardian a few weeks ago. A chap who was a law student, and he'd actually gone to one of these companies and got them to write an essay for his law degree. And they promised him it would get him at least a 2-1. And when the essay was marked, he only got a 2-2. So he wrote to The Guardian to ask if he could complain. The Guardian quickly pointed out to him that A, he probably couldn't complain, and B, if the Law Society found out about this, they would very quickly remove him from the course. That would be grossly dishonest. Yes, and the chap was going to do law later on, and he was willing to pay someone to write his essay for him. Okay, but the point taken is, if you are approached by people who are offering to write your essays for you or make editing to them, don't take it up. That's not accidental plagiarism. That would be very definitely a deliberate attempt to deceive. I think we addressed that one with our little example from the Marmot report. It does have to be a bit more substantial than just changing the odd word. Generally, you won't get any marks for recycling the tutor's notes. Okay, most of the stuff we're concerned with is textual, but plagiarism applies to lifting material from anyone else. It can be graphical, it can be a computer program. You need to ascribe where it's come from. So those, we've heard those, but we don't buy any of them. Now, what will happen if... What usually happens is I get an email from a tutor saying, I'm marking this student's essay, it looks a bit funny, or the Turnitin report is a bit strange. Or I may get a note from an exam invigilator saying, we caught one of your students doing something in an exam. I have a look at the work. Now, occasionally the markers are just a little bit twitched, and it's not unfair means. It may be a badly written essay, but it's not unfair means, and I can tell the markers to get on with it. Just go on, mark it, sort it out, no problem. But our markers are a fairly astute bunch, and usually if they spot something wrong, there is something wrong. So I have a look at the essay, and I decide there is evidence of unfair means. We will then set up a meeting, and we will invite you to come along to that meeting. At that stage, we are not saying you've done anything wrong. We're saying there's something funny about your essay, and we need to sort it out. If you get a letter like that, it is very much in your interest to attend that meeting. Usually it means that until we have spoken to you and found out what's happening, We can't mark your essay and you don't get a grade for it. So it's in your interest to attend that meeting. It can be a little bit scary for you, so you're quite at liberty to approach the student services. When you come to the meeting, you can bring someone with you, a fellow student, a friend, a family member, someone from student services. You can come along with a support, if you like. When you come to one of those meetings, typically you'll find there are 4 or 5 people in the room. There will be someone from the TSU, Teaching Support Unit, who is going to minute the meeting. We want an accurate record of it. There will be me, probably chairing it, or if I'm not around, maybe your course director. There will be the marker, who will want to ask you some questions about how you wrote your essay. There will be you, and you may have a friend or supporter with you. And basically, when you come along to one of those meetings, just be open and honest with us. Just tell us what happened. If you have any extenuating circumstances, if you are trying to write the essay under very difficult situations, such as being ill, please tell us about that. Just be honest and upfront with us and tell us what's gone on. Typically, at the end of one of those meetings, we find that there is unfair means, because we tend to set the bar quite high for interviewing students. We may maybe have been a bit jumpy, maybe there aren't any unfair means. We can give you a bit of advice about how to avoid this situation in the future, and off you go. Generally, though, if we've got that far as interviewing you, we have some serious concerns. And then one of two things happens. If we can satisfy ourselves that the plagiarism is your first, or the unfair means are your first offence, we haven't seen you before for anything like this. If, taking a very broad view, it's accidental, and if it's not on an absolute massive scale, we can sort it out here in SHA very quickly. If, however, it's the second or third time, well, the second time we've seen you, or we think there is something deliberate going on, like paying someone to write your essay, or it's on an absolutely massive scale, the university doesn't allow me to sort it out. I have to refer you to a faculty discipline committee. Now that happens for things, usually that means the student's been seen, given a warning, done it again. Once you've had a warning for one form of unfair means, it counts for all of them. So if we see you in the first term and give you a warning about plagiarism, if we see you in the second term for collusion or self-plagiarism, that is your second offence. Occasionally I will send people to discipline committees for the first offence if it is on an absolutely massive scale. We occasionally have students who have handed in dissertations which have been almost entirely plagiarised. And you can't accidentally plagiarise a 10,000 word project when you've got a supervisor helping you write it. So that would look definitely a bit funny. So if it's on a huge scale, if it's recurrent, or if there is evidence of deceit, then you get sent straight off to a faculty discipline committee. I don't want that to happen because filling in the paperwork for one of these things is an incredible amount of work. You don't want it to happen because faculty discipline committees have much sharper teeth than I do. About the worst thing I can do is say, you repeat the work and your mark's capped at 50%. A faculty discipline committee tends to impose much more severe penalties because you've usually had that little minor penalty. You've done that, we've warned you, you applied a minor penalty, you're now up for a second time. And faculty discipline committees, the sort of penalties they apply, they may refuse you all credits for that module and refuse you the right to resubmit. And basically that means you get a mark of 0 for that module, which you cannot improve on. There is no option to sit it again. Once you have a mark of 0 for any taught module, you can't get a master's. No, you can't. The exam board may, and it has a discretion over this, and it may not allow you to leave the programme with a lesser reward like the certificate or the diploma. But once you have a mark of 0 for any module, your hope of getting a master's are over. Or, and this does happen sometimes, the faculty discipline committee may decide to throw you out. No qualification, no award whatsoever. It will deny you the credits for the modules you've already passed, and it will just throw you out of the university. That doesn't happen very often, so maybe every 2 or 3 years I have to send a student off for a faculty discipline committee. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. Now, before I forget, a little bit of double jeopardy. How many of you here are doctors, nurses, pharmacists, things like that, dentists? A few hands creeping up out there. Okay. There's a little problem. I'm not very gloomy, but I have to warn you about this. It particularly applies to doctors, dentists, pharmacists, people like that in the UK. If you're registered to practice in the UK, and you have a professional body to which you're responsible, something like the General Medical Council, the General Dental Council, the Royal College of Nursing, the Pharmaceutical Society. You have a professional body which basically gives you the right to practice as a doctor dentist, nurse, whatever. If we send you off for a formal disciplinary hearing and the university decides to discipline you, the university may, in fact I think it is legally obliged, to inform your professional body. Yes? Now, just to step back and avoid alarm, we won't do that for a first offence. We see you for some minor issue of plagiarism. Okay, don't do it again. Off you go, resubmit your work. We're not going to involve the GMC over that. But if it gets as formal discipline and being thrown out, the university may well inform your professional body. Well, in fact, it does. It's only happened once in 9 years. But a few years ago, we had a student on one of our courses who was a hospital doctor. Early on in their career, they committed plagiarism. We warned them appropriately and told them not to do it again. Off they went. 2 years later, they handed in an entirely plagiarised dissertation. So I sent them off for a formal faculty disciplinary hearing, which not surprisingly decided to throw them out lock, stock and barrel and inform the General Medical Council, because they were a doctor registered to practice in the UK. Next week, that former student is up before the General Medical Council for a fitness to practice hearing, which may terminate their medical career. Okay, so those of you who have clinical qualifications in professional bodies, you have to be maybe doubly careful, shall we say. Okay, we're recording this, say, for the benefit of distance learning students. The rest of you can have a 1 minute break. If you're a distance learning student or an online student, again, the same rules apply. We'll probably set up the interview via some electronic method like Adobe, Skype. If all else fails, we can use a mobile phone or occasionally email, but that's a pretty dire way of doing it. Important message for all of you is to keep an eye on your email. The university regards email as its prime way of keeping in contact with you. You must keep an eye on your university email. Just saying, oh, I didn't read my university email, so I didn't know there was this interview I had to go to. No, you've got to keep an eye on your university email regularly. That's how we keep in contact with you. And by and large, we expect you to use your university email address. That's the way we know you are a registered student. If you get an email from Jane Sykes at Hotmail, there could be hundreds of Jane Sykes at Hotmail. If you get an email from Jane Sykes at Sheffield ACUC, we know it's someone who's here. And some members of staff will not answer student emails that come from work or Hotmail addresses or things like that, because we don't know who you are. So you must use your university email, and you must keep an eye on it regularly. Well, regularly would be maybe once a year, frequently, both regularly and frequently. Now, what happens at the end of an unfair means hearing? Suppose we have called you up because we think there's been some plagiarism in a piece of coursework. It's possible that maybe we've been a bit overcautious and there is no unfair means, although probably we want to give you a bit of advice to make sure that doesn't happen again. So we just give you a little bit of advice and send you on your way. In practice, what happens is, at the end of an unfair means hearing, I will instruct the markers to complete marking your essay and to ignore the bits of your essay in which there is unfair means. So if there's plagiarism, the bits which you plagiarised, the marker just ignores them, the blanks, they're not there. If it's self-plagiarism, the stuff you've already had marks for is similarly ignored, it's not there. If it's collusion, the bits which you've worked on jointly or borrowed from another student, they're blanks. The marker just marks what is left, what is your own work. And since these essays often were of rather dubious quality to start with, that normally means you fail that piece of work. You get a mark under 50%. As with any piece of work which you have failed, you're allowed a resubmission. You get a second go, and for your second go, your mark will be capped at 50% in terms of calculating your overall score on the module. That's the penalty. You get to resubmit the work, your mark's capped at 50%. Similarly, exam, if we've seen you because of exam misconduct or use of an unapproved calculator, you may have to resit the exam and your mark's capped at 50%. About a week after an unfair means hearing, you tend to get a letter from me explaining what we've decided. Many students find this letter somewhat worrying. It does stay on your student file. And many students worry that it's then brought up at exam boards or if someone asks for a reference. It's not. It stays very, very quietly on your student file. It's not brought up as a black mark against you. It doesn't stop you finishing all your modules. It doesn't stop you graduating. It doesn't stop you going to the ceremony. It doesn't stop you getting your qualification. But it is a formal warning about unfair means. And that letter becomes very important under one specific circumstance if we see you for a second offence. At that stage, so we've given you a warning and you're back with us again. And as I've explained, that means I can't deal with it in-house. At that stage, you're probably going off to a faculty discipline committee. So the letter is a warning letter. It stays on your file quietly. But if you commit a second offence, it then becomes very significant. If we do apply any penalties to you, or if a faculty discipline committee applies a penalty, you always have the right to appeal. I think from receiving the letter you have 10 days, I think, in which to appeal. And the letter contains details of how to appeal if you think we are being unduly harsh. Now, the vast majority of the cases we see in SHAR will end at this red line. We'll interview you, we'll say, a few problems here, we'll apply a penalty, we'll ask you to resubmit the work, we'll give you some advice about how to make sure it doesn't happen again, we'll point you in the direction of sources of help like your personal tutor. I usually tell personal tutors if someone's been involved in an unfair means, so that the tutor knows that the student may turn up with some questions. We direct you to go and chat to your personal tutor. So the vast majority of cases we see in SHAR, maybe we interview 10, 15 students a year, we stop here. We give you a warning, we give you some advice, off you go and repeat the work, your mark's capped at 50. Occasionally, maybe every second or third year, someone crosses the red line. It's deceit, it's recurrence, it's a very large-scale plagiarism, and they go off to a discipline committee, which, as I say, can throw you out lock, stock and barrel. Okay, I think we've said this already. If we do notify you about an unfair means interview, it's important you come and see us. The chances are we won't be able to mark your work till we have seen you. This is a little bit old, but it's a statement from the university. Several students have already been subject to disciplinary action for using unfair means, including copying the work of others without proper acknowledgement. 3 of these students have been expelled from the university. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Cases involving students registered on professional courses such as medicine or nursing have also been considered under fitness to practice. So those of you who are clinicians, you've got a slightly other problem to deal with. Okay, little task coming up for you. Wakey, wakey. We are going to set you a little essay to do. Very short. Hour or two's work. Not very much. We want you all to attend one of these training sessions. You're here. Tick. The next thing you have to do is this little test essay, the writing skills test essay. When you come to hand it in, you will discover on Mole there's a little box for you to tick saying, I understand the rules and regulations. Don't, although it is a tick box, don't make it a tick box exercise. Make sure you understand the rules and regulations about unfair means before you tick that box. You are making a declaration to us. If in doubt, chat to someone. Me, one of the tutors, your personal tutor, something like that. Your course directors expect you to complete that test essay. For you who are here already, to do it within 2 weeks' time. People who are joining up from now on will get a short extension. It's quite a short time scale. We want you to complete the essay, hand it in, and get feedback from your personal tutors before you have to hand in any assessed coursework. So you have the benefit of the test essay and the feedback before you start handing in any stuff that's going to get you marks. The idea of the test essay, it's kind of testing the water. You get a chance to see if you can write appropriately for master's level. You get some idea of how the university grades academic writing. Can you practice it's your citation and referencing? Can you show you can use Turnitin all right? And it's only a little task. It's an 800-word essay. All the details of how to do it will be up on the student hubs in Mole. And we give you 3 choices, 3 topics. One is screening for diabetes. One is voluntary absence from alcohol. If you've heard about the idea of dry January, you go up drinking for January, probably to get rid of the Christmas hangover. Or sleep deprivation. The last one, the sleep deprivation, may appeal more to those of you who are studying courses which have a strong management component. But basically you can choose whichever of those 3 topics you like. You only need to do one. Don't do all 3. Just do one. Pick whichever one you like. And for each of those 3 topics, we actually give you 2 articles which present slightly different arguments. And what we suggest you do is you read those 2 articles, either the 2 articles for diabetes, 2 articles for abstinence, or the 2 articles for sleep deprivation. You make some notes in your own words, and then you write your little essay. Now, 800 words is only about 3 or 4 paragraphs. So an opening paragraph, what's the question? What's the issue here? 1 paragraph summarising the arguments of the first paper, 1 paragraph summarising the arguments of the second paper, a concluding paragraph to say which side of the argument you think holds water, which side you agree with, which is more sort of firm. Check your essay through Turnitin. We'll show you how to do that this afternoon. Allow time to have a look at the originality report. Maybe do a bit of editing on your essay. Hand in your final version, please, by Friday the 7th of October. And the idea is to get your tutors to give you some comments on that within 2 weeks. Normally we get marking done within 3 weeks. We're tightening this up a bit. We want you to submit the essay pretty quickly, so you've got next week and the week after to do it. We want your tutors to give you some feedback on that within 2 weeks before you hit any marking deadlines. Again, little note for distance learning students, same things apply, they do the essay as well, and some students who join SHAR to do single modules, this is for their benefit, people who come as what are called continuing professional development or learning beyond registration students, they come to SHAR to do single modules. Again, they do the same thing, some of them may come in the spring, so we record this presentation, and the instructions are there for them when they come in the spring. So say about test. Oh yes, for the test essay, we just give you 2 papers for each of the options. You don't need to go and do a whole literature search. You don't need to go and find lots of extra sources. Just use the 2 papers we give you. We don't expect you to spend more than an hour or 2 on this. I suggest that unless you have some pressing personal reasons to get hold of your personal tutors now, you've got some sort of crisis and you need some help, you might as well wait till you've submitted the test essay and they have given you the feedback on it, and then make an appointment to see your personal tutor. If there are any issues in the feedback you've had on the test essay, you might want to take it up with them. It'll give you something to talk about before you give them a quick biography of yourself. So unless you've got any pressing needs, I'd wait till you've had the feedback on the test essay and then go and see your personal tutor. When you get the feedback on the test essay, you'll probably see a mark of 0 in the top right-hand corner. That doesn't mean you've failed. It's because we have to put a number into grade mark. We have to put a number into MOL before it will release your feedback. So the 0 is just so that you can see what your tutor has written. And I hope most of your tutors will explain to you that one of 2 things have happened. Either your essay is okay, it's up to master's level standard, fine, tick, proceed, or they'll have said, there are a few problems we need to talk about in terms of your writing or your citation or your referencing. So I hope the tutor feedback will make it clear, this is okay, come for a chat, but it seems to be fine on this score. Or they'll say, you need a bit of help here, come and have a little chat with us. Other sources of help, well, you get feedback on the test essay from your personal tutor. It may help you decide whether things are going well or badly. There are loads of student handbooks. They contain advice about academic writing. They show you how to lay out different sources in terms of citation and reference. Particularly for those of you for whom English may not be your first language, there is the Writing Advisory Service and Deborah Cobbett sessions. When you hand in coursework and it's marked, you will get feedback. Now, most of you maybe just look at the mark and think, I've passed, great, fine, okay. Please look at the feedback. Some of us spend quite a lot of time writing feedback on student essays. And if the markers are doing their job, the feedback should explain to you what you're doing well, keep doing it. What you're doing badly, try and do it better. If you ever fail a module, many students will fail one module as they pass through the course. You resit it, fine, you get a mark over 50, you proceed. If you find you have failed a module, then I think the tutor really should explain to you in the feedback why you have failed and give you some pretty detailed instructions about what you need to do in your second attempt to make sure you pass second time round. But do look at feedback. You'll have meetings with the module tutors, you can have meetings with your personal tutor. There is this tutorial pack up on the website which has a very explicit section about the use of quotations. Get yourself a good dictionary. Something like the Concise Oxford, something like that. Now, I've been gabbling away fairly fluently in English for 50 odd years, but English is a very complex language. It has a very large and subtle vocabulary. And in an average year, I come across new words that I've never heard of before, even after 50 years. And do be careful, irrespective of whether English is your first, second, third, fourth, fifth language, whatever, do be careful how you use English words. If in doubt, look things up. For instance, in the English language, there are these 2 words, disinterested and uninterested. They don't mean the same thing. There's quite a distinct difference between uninterested and disinterested. The word enormity is an interesting word which I think is changing its meaning, and it's now, to some extent, widely used just to imply that something is very big. People think it's derived from the word enormous. It's a kind of descriptive phrase meaning this is a very big task, the enormity of the task. Now, if you get a decent, possibly slightly old-fashioned dictionary and look it up, you will discover that some of us use the word enormity in a rather different way, and it means something somewhat different. I was recently reading, I think, one of H.G. Wells's novels, and I had to look up several words like these, which I'd never come across before. So get hold of a good dictionary and get used to using it. Okay, thank you. You've all been very quiet. We're finishing a little bit early. Questions? Yes?
Iris. You mentioned something called
Iris. Yes, this is on...
Yes, it's
Sally
on your
or-
courses. This
Okay.
should be right
Yeah.
in the middle. It's the library Hire and Iris course. And
Okay.
it's a really good resource for
Okay.
just finding out how to search for study skill resources online, basically. Well worth a look.
Okay.
You're going to have a talk on it this afternoon at 2 something. Okay, so they're going to go through it, but it is a really useful resource.
I have a question. About like for some of the modules they're like written list, like reading lists.
Yes.
Could we order it on library
It's a question
or
for you, I think.
The reading list,
okay.
you should get a reading list for every module.
Okay.
They should be in your mould, so when you go into your mould, there should be quite a lot of the different modules will have their reading list there.
Okay.
All of the things that they put on their reading list should be available on the University Star Library accounts, either online or as hard copies.
Okay.
They may not be available as hard copies within the Shire Library, but they will be available at a library in the university.
Okay.
Okay.
When you join the university library system, you become a member of the whole university library system. So you can use the Information Commons Library, the Western Bank Library, the Hallamshire Hospital Library, the Northern General Library, use all the libraries. The Shire Library is a little bit different. You're free to use that, but because we fund it, it is for our students.
Okay.
But your library card will get you into any one of the other libraries around the campus. Hello.
When will those articles be available for the
I think they're up now.
They are available.
Yes.
whereabouts that
Mo, student helps us writing test essay or something like that.
Shall I get up on screen?
Oh, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. I'm just reading about them now. Very fun.
It's good that it's not too long.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
It's gonna get longer.
Yes.
Say we have 2 modules,
Yes.
and in both these modules we have an essay, and we have this article we found. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. It can go for both modules, both essays. Would that be okay, or would somebody say that I'm using my work to
That's fine. I mean, there are
put
a
into
finite
another?
number of articles out there. That number is very
Okay.
large. It's quite possible you might have a very good article which is relevant to, say,
Okay.
So that's the one.
student module. That's fine. You can use the same article, but you must write a new text for each module.
Okay.
Use the same article.
Okay.
Oh, hi.
It's all there.
First we have to
Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, I'm sorry if it's already been answered, but will it come up only after we've registered? Because looking at my mole now, it's not on there.
Oh, really? Yeah. If we're going to go through a few cycles of just re-registering students that are going to come on a little bit later. So yeah,
Is it only after the official registration tomorrow?
yeah, we'll definitely have it after then.
I think you need to be fully registered to see everything that's on mode.
Yeah.
Some of you have registered online this year, which is the first time that for like different module choices, and that's given some students more access than they would normally have at this point. So don't panic if you can't get into everything on Mole. After Thursday, give it a few hours, don't expect it immediately. It should be on by like kind of evening time on Thursday. You should be able to access this fine new written assignments, essay writing test. If it's not on Friday, come to the lunch, Kicks a day, you can ask why you're not registered and they should be able to give you an appointment.
So yes, the writing skills test essay. So it's on the right hand side when you go into Mole. It's called the Shire Student Hub Writing Skills and Academic Support. And the test essay is just down there, bottom link on the menu. And you have all the details for the brief. I said back over there.
Or a nice picture of John Nichol.
So you have all the details right there. It'll just take you through all the instructions. So nothing to worry about. This is the guide that Alan mentioned. This is the draft submission slot where you're going to be just kind of testing your working, making sure it actually does look as it should. So for those of you who have not seen it before, view complete, click on that, submit there. And there's a guide on how to do that right there.
Which we'll tell you about this afternoon anyway.
And very finally, this is the little bit which you have to tick to make sure that you can see the final submission slot, just saying, yes, I understand, unfair means, I do know what I'm doing, and I am happy to stick to our rules and regulations.
And if anything happens to me, I'll leave all my money to university.
So I hope that helps.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you could just go back
for the slides. So the quote you said was a good one.
Yep. Can we go back to my presentation? Hang on, actually. Get her in the end, hang on. You mean this is an example of good writing, yes?
That's using the Harvard referencing system.
Get used to one or the other, Harvard or
Yeah.
Vancouver. Don't mix them up. That looks really weird.
Yeah.
Use one.
Please
Learn how
stick
to
to
use one and use it consistently and accurately. Yes, hello.
I just wanted to ask about the referencing style. I've never used Harvard before. I usually use APA. And they have a 6th edition. So with Harvard, is there any latest edition or it's just Harvard?
If you go to Shar Library, hopefully that will be covered this afternoon, and they will show you where the links are in the presentation that's at 2:10. Okay, today. But if you go to the Shar Library web pages, they have attachments for Harvard, and they actually recommend Harvard for Shar, but we don't mark you down if you use Vancouver. We're happy with either. And they've got really detailed step-by-step guides and videos on how to use them. Familiarise yourself, pick one, use it for every module. For every module in Shar, whatever course you're on, we're happy with whichever one, but please pick one and use it well. Okay? So if you put Shar Library, it would send you into the links and follow it through, and there'll be links directly from that Shar Student Hub as well. So
Yes, sorry.
Just the slides again. This one, the next one.
The next one. Well, the next one. You mean the one before or the next
Previous one, sorry.
previous one? That was where you've got a direct quote, but you've not shown that you understand the concepts in there clearly.
and these will all be available online as well, so you can go back through these slides on the Shar Student Hub page of your MOL.
Everyone reasonably happy? Hello, hi.
I'm concerned about my speed of reading and writing. I'm concerned about the speed, my speed
Yes.
of reading and writing. Can you recommend how many hours for reading the 2 articles and writing?
Well, this depends a bit on your English language skills, obviously. I mean, I would suggest an hour or two, but if you are reading a language you're not familiar with, it may take you longer than that.
So an hour for reading the 2 articles or for the whole?
I would suggest if you are fluent in English, 2 hours should see the whole thing done. But if English is not your first language, it may take you a bit longer than that.
And make sure you make use of the ELTC. They do particular sessions on kind of getting your reading speed up a bit. So if you do struggle with reading speed, they're great for whether you struggle with English or like me, you're dyslexic and occasionally it takes a bit longer to grasp what something's being said. So make sure you use it. It's really useful. Okay. So on that really positive day, so I know you're really excited.
I'm afraid you get more of me and Dan at 1 o'clock.
You do.
So, even if you haven't used Turnitin before, please come to that session because we use Turnitin in a rather liberal way in Shar. I think we can still teach you some new things about it.